Hello everyone, Shannon Gardner here. Thank you for joining me on my last video when we talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm just going to pull up that pyramid for you guys to see again because it is relevant to what we're going to be talking about today as well. So I'm just going to pull it up here. There you go. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. So before in the last video, we talked about mainly we're going to be focusing on the bottom four deficiency needs because those that have to do with emotional, social, and biological needs are oftentimes what get threatened in some way or affected, which then can cause a person to go into the fight or flight mode, causes a lot of stress. And then we have three stages of stress that can lead to chronic stress. So the first stage of the three stages that lead to chronic stress are the fight or flight mode. So we're going to be talking about that today first. So first, I'm just going to quickly go over the deficiency needs. We've got physiological needs. Those are things like your basic needs, like food, clothing, that sort of thing. Then you have your safety needs. Do you live in a safe environment? Do you live in a safe neighborhood? Are the people that you live with safe? Or is your safety being threatened in some sort of way? Perhaps you're being threatened. Maybe you can't pay your rent even, and you have this fear of becoming homeless because of the cost of living being so high, that sort of thing. I know a lot of families are dealing with that at the moment around the world. Okay. Then we have belongingness and love needs. Belongingness could be to, a certain group. It's a feeling of belongingness basically in your life, whether it's feeling part of your community, part of your family. We saw a lot of that being compromised the last few years with everything happening in the world. We have seen a lot of division happening, and we've seen a lot of families torn apart on top of that. So because of different views on the world and everything happening in the world. So we have also love needs. Are you being loved and cared for by family and friends or people in your community? Perhaps there's an elderly lady, and are we looking after these elderly people that are in our community? Are we showing love to them? Are we helping sick people in our community, neighbors, family members? Maybe you could make someone a meal who's sick, that sort of thing, and bring it over to their house. There's a lot of acts of kindness and love that we can give to each other and to others in our community. Then we go on to esteem needs. So once these bottom three are met, then you start to feel a sense of self-worth, confidence in yourself, and that sort of thing. So those are the four main deficiency needs that I would say probably get compromised the most. And are the four basic needs for moving forwards to the upper levels, which we won't talk about as much in this video today. So there's that one. I'm going to share a different screen here. Just bear with me a moment. I'm going to take these glasses off. I think they're a little bit glary, so let's see. I was just trying those I got those glasses too. Supposed to help with the light coming off the computer, the laptop or whatever. Trying to find this thing I want to show you guys. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this. This is the reference is at the bottom there of where this image has been taken from. So this is basically called the limbic system in our brain here. We have different glands in our brain. As you know, our body is full of different hormones. We have the hypothalamus that is in charge of homeostasis, basically. Then we have the I can't pronounce that. The amygdala, which is, takes care of emotion. The hippocampus, memory conversion. The thalamus relays information. Okay, so this is relevant to fight or flight, our response to stress, because all of these things happen in the nervous system and start in the brain, and then they have effects to the rest of our body and how we deal with stress in life in general. So we're going to talk about stage 1 of the fight or flight response. So I just showed you an image of the limbic system. So the fight or flight response is controlled by the limbic system, which is responsible for our emotions and involuntary responses. So we first get triggered by something either that we've seen, we've touched, we've heard, something to do with our senses. So we're perceiving information. We're perceiving that there is some sort of threat to us. Could be, various different situations that we're in. And basically what that is doing, it's triggering and it activates the amygdala. And so that is the emotion response that you see that I showed you on the brain area in that image. After that, if we feel this sense of fear about any areas of our life, basically, the amygdala is activated and it sends a signal to the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus is that gland that we have in our body. It helps regulate so many other glands, like the pituitary gland, also known as the third eye. And then from there on, it's like the top of the hierarchy of a lot of the hormones in our body. And then after the pituitary gland, then we have the thyroid gland, which the thyroid gland is so important for regulating pretty much all the other glands and hormones and systems of the body thereof. So they're after that. But yeah, so you have the hypothalamus, and that ends up activating the sympathetic nervous system. And then at the same time, you have your adrenal glands after the sympathetic nervous system is activated that end up releasing adrenaline. So you get that adrenaline rush when your body's 5 senses end up experiencing and sensing fear. That's how we get that adrenaline rush. So an adrenaline rush only lasts a few minutes. Normally, it provides the body with physical strength to fight or flight, basically. So effects that adrenaline release has on the body are things like increased blood pressure, increased perspiration, so sweating more. This is because it's your body's way of trying to cool itself down. Increased heart rate, increased oxygen intake, so rapid breathing. It increases the lung capacity of how much air can be brought into the lungs. And glucose is also released from the liver at this point. So the adrenaline rush usually lasts a few minutes. After that, we have the HPA axis. So HPA axis is short for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, which is responsible for the adaptation of the stress response. So it basically activates the physiological stress response and prepares the body for a prolonged fight or flight. So after we have the release of adrenaline and then we have that adrenaline rush that lasts a few minutes, then the HPA axis is getting the body ready for a longer period of time in which the body will be in fight or flight mode. So after the adrenaline rush, when the HPA axis is triggered, there is a release of cortisol at this point. This is because cortisol lasts longer than the effects of adrenaline. So your body is releasing it to help you stay in this fight or flight mode for a prolonged period of time. And so that's why the body is releasing that. So during this time, there is a communication going on between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands. So they're working together to keep you safe, basically, at this point. So the hypothalamus releases something that's called the short form is CRH, which stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. So the CRH stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. It also stimulates the pituitary glands, which then release the hormone called ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. It also releases a hormone called beta endorphin, which really helps with pain reduction. So if your stress is due to something that is painful, it's going to release the beta endorphin to help reduce the feeling of pain at that point. The ACTH then stimulates the adrenal glands to release glucocorticoids, including cortisol. So when we are dealt with a situation where we are dealing with chronic stress, the HPA axis is chronically activated. So you saw in the beginning, we had the adrenaline rush. During this time, there is a release of adrenaline, and that is only lasting a few minutes. But if the stress goes on after a few minutes and it's a continually stressful situation that you're in, then the HP axis is the one that kicks in and that is chronically activated. So you can see that at this point, you've got this chronic release of cortisol happening at this time. So for those of you who don't know what cortisol is, it is also a hormone similar to adrenaline, but a little bit different. It inhibits some of the effects that it has on the body is that it inhibits insulin production. So you constantly have this, because it's inhibiting insulin production, you constantly have this steady release of glucose that's constantly being released. And because of that, it is also preventing the storage of glucose as well. Having this constant release of cortisol as well suppresses the immune system, and it also suppresses the digestive process. The digestive process is stimulated by the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we have a constant release of cortisol in the body, We see that it inhibits insulin production, it suppresses the immune response, suppresses the digestive system and the processes within the digestive system, and it can also suppress reproductive functions. So, the first stage we have the fight or flight response. After a few minutes of being in that, if you're continuing to be in that state of the fight or flight, it then turns into the second stage. You have that release of the cortisol that constantly keeps us in that stage. Your body is trying to protect you because you're in this prolonged state of fight or flight. That brings us to stage 2, which is adaptation. In the adaptation stage, the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. And during this time, we see restoring of the suppressed physiological functions. So, stage 2, after fight or flight, the release of adrenaline, and then the continual long-term fight or flight with the release of cortisol, we can already see the effects that it's had on the body. So stage 2, we have something called adaptation. So during this time, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, and this starts helping to activating the functions that are needed in the body to restore the suppressed physiological functions. So the amount of cortisol that is released starts to be reduced. So at this stage, a person is starting to have coping strategies are it being implemented to deal with the stressor, the whatever the issue is that put them in the fight or flight mode in the first place. And as soon as the stressor is removed or the problem is solved, their body can return back to homeostasis. But if the issue that has caused the stress in the first place, has caused the fight or flight mode in the first place, is not removed, is not resolved, the sympathetic nervous system is regularly being activated. So we have this continuation of the sympathetic nervous system that is constantly being activated. So you constantly keep going back into that fight or flight mode, that long-term fight or flight mode where you constantly have that release of cortisol. Now I see people all over the world having problems with, their hormone levels are out of whack. They have high estrogen, people with reproductive issues, all these different things, and I think a lot of people really look past stress as being a cause for a lot of these issues that we have. We see high estrogen levels in a lot of women, and look at our society now. Look at how stressful everyone's lives are. We have this constant, rat race that people are being a part of, this pressure for people to work long hours and so many hours and be away from their families to put food on the table. We've got the rising price of living is absolutely insane at the moment. The cost of groceries just to be able to provide those 4 deficiency needs that we talked about in the pyramid there. It takes a lot of stress to be able to provide those things for our families right now at the moment, and just for those basic needs alone. So if you top all those basic needs that you need to provide for, which can be stressful in itself at the moment with the cost of living, the cost of food, rent, mortgages, housing, all that stuff, heating, or air conditioning, whatever the case may be of where you live. If you put that on top of, say, maybe you're in an unhappy relationship, maybe you're married to a narcissist who is emotionally abusive, or you're in an environment where Maybe you're not in a permanent home. Maybe your home is temporary and you're this, or you live in an unsafe neighborhood, perhaps, or maybe you live in a completely different country where you don't have family or friends. Maybe you've moved to a new place, you don't know anybody, you're not feeling that belonging or the love. Maybe you don't have any friends, you don't feel the love or belonging to where you are. So if you're already dealing with basic, having to go to work, provide food for your family and all those basic needs, and then on top of that, the other parts of your area are being affected, we can see this chronic stress that a lot of people in society constantly have to deal with. Okay, so after stage 2, we end up at stage 3, which is exhaustion. The exhaustion phase occurs when the emotional resources, okay, so things like depression, isolation, disengagement, anxiety, and your physiological resources, so things like glucose and insulin levels imbalance, malnutrition, sleep deprivation, adrenal fatigue. So once all of those areas are all depleted, we end up with stage 3, which is exhaustion. So at this point, when you're in stage 3, that is basically being in a state of chronic stress in your life. So anyway, I just wanted to show you guys the importance of those 4 things that I showed on the pyramid and how they relate. So I'll just bring up that image again. There it is again. So we have those 4 basic needs at the bottom there and how it relates to being in fight or flight mode, and then eventually leading to exhaustion and chronic stress. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video today. I hope this video has helped in some way for those who have watched it to understand some of the different causes that lead to chronic stress and basically our basic needs and what we need to have to function as human beings to be able to grow and thrive in our life. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. See ya.